Hello, everybody. It is Sales Chats. That's right. Here we are, Eric and John.
Yeah, and actually on a rainy San Diego day, and we haven't been able to say that in quite a while.
Yeah, we live in a drought. So.
Exactly.
Well, we've got a fellow Southern Californian, Dave Brock, on with us today. Hey, Dave.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, this stuff falling from the sky, I was really having a hard time figuring out what that was. I hadn't seen it before, so.
Yeah, exactly. Any kids born in the last 12 to 14 months are probably seeing it for the first time.
So Dave has spent his entire career developing high-performance organizations at places like IBM, Tektronix, and now he's president and founder of Partners in Excellence, where he consults to a veritable who's who of the Fortune 25, companies that we know nothing about, like Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP. So today we're going to take a frightening, maybe it should be Halloween, but it's May, a frightening look at the cost of selling. When you think about all the costs packed into like hiring, training, sales activities, quotas, you're talking about a really wide amount of costs all in. Right, Dave?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, too much when we talk about selling, we really talk about, how to reach and how to engage the customer, the process of selling, the tactics and skills of selling. But, what we have to do, particularly from a managerial level, is start looking at the business of managing the sales function, the business of producing results, and how effectively we're doing it and managing those critical assets for our corporations and for our customers.
Yeah, well, why do you think it is that we're so good at calculating the cost of so many things in our business, but when it comes to calculating the cost...
KPIs everywhere.
Yeah, we've got KPIs coming out of every angle and everything, but when it comes to calculating the cost of a salesperson or the whole sales function in general, we kind of ignore that or shy away from that.
Yeah, I don't know what it is, and actually I never became really sensitive to this until I was a general manager of a business, and I started having my manufacturing manager coming into me, and I started looking at how he managed his business, and I said, oh my God, I need to look at all our functions this way. And so, while VPs of manufacturing kind of grow up thinking like, how effectively am I managing my assets, my resources, my inventory flow, and so on. As salespeople and sales managers, we sometimes forget about that. And part of it, I think, is the nature of our jobs. We get caught up in executing in front of the customer, but we forget that we're managing a business, and that business has costs, it has assets that as stewards for the corporation, we really have to manage to maximum impact and effectiveness.
So, it really starts with the hiring process, doesn't it, Dave? I mean, when we talk about hiring, it's a loaded question in general, but unpack for us some of the staggering costs that you see there.
Well, it starts from, most of the time when I talk to managers about hiring, sometimes they're a little bit casual about it, or sometimes they're driven by desperation. They say, I have this empty headcount, I gotta fill it really quickly. And so what happens is they go through and interview maybe 5 candidates, and they settle for one of the 5 rather than saying, is this the right person for achieving what I want to do, and not settling. So you look at it, and typically what they do is say, well, if I make a bad decision, I've lost some recruiting costs, I've lost some training costs, and maybe tens of thousands of dollars or $100,000 or so in terms of sunk, salary and that kind of thing. But when you look at it, they're making a multi-million-dollar decision. And if we look at selling our customers something that's a multi-million-dollar decision for them, every organization I've ever worked with looks at that very carefully. And so each salesperson that we're hiring is a multi-million-dollar decision. We're expecting them to drive millions of dollars a year in revenue for us. So why do we treat that so casually? Why are we careless about it? Why do we say, oh, I can flip a salesperson and get somebody new? I mean, this is big money that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, and I do think a lot of it is driven, as you say, by desperation, because if you have your revenue target is X and you have 8 slots that are filled and their quota is taking up so much and you have this big gap, you kind of feel desperate. I've got to get somebody in to plug that gap. And
pressure is high.
The pressure is high. So how much do you think that is the fault of maybe the sales management or the organization that don't really understand that there's a process here and that hiring the wrong person or making a desperate decision is actually going to cost you more?
I think it's kind of systemic in our organizations. I think you get to the very top sales executive, and they manage things kind of from a budgetary point of view. Are we spending the right amount of money, so on and so forth. But I really think if you look at what a CEO does or a VP of manufacturing or something, they really manage things from an investment point of view. A few years ago, I was working with a Fortune 50 high technology organization, and they were bringing us in because they said, we need some stuff in terms of account penetration, blah, 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 growing our major accounts and so on. And, so I started asking them some questions, and kind of just as a throwaway, casually, I said, well, what's your voluntary, involuntary turnover? And they said, voluntary turnover in the first year of employment of a salesperson is 72%.
Wow.
And then, I just sat, yeah, exactly, Eric. I sat back and I said, now let me figure this out. And I kind of went through a back of the envelope calculation, and I said, do you realize this is costing you a minimum of $700 million a year? And all of a sudden there was 5 minutes of stunned silence. And what it was they were hiring okay, but they'd forgotten the onboarding process. And the onboarding process sucked. I mean, what happened was they'd say, here's your card key, here's your computer, here's your territory, here's your commission plan, good luck and Godspeed. Mm-hmm. And they were bringing really highly qualified guys in, but the guys, as they started getting going, they found they couldn't be successful, and they wanted to be successful, so they were just saying, screw this, I'm going to go someplace else where I can be successful. I think somehow we get so caught up as managers and as salespeople in the momentum of day-to-day work that we forget to look at we're managing a business, we're managing these multi-million-dollar assets. We want to, as if I'm a factory manager, I want to keep my line going. Mm-hmm. I want to keep things highly productive. As a sales manager, I want to do the same thing. I want to get my line going. I want to get that as productive as possible. I don't want to have any interruptions, because when I have interruptions or downtime on it, I start losing millions of dollars. So you see that system kind of systemically going through the entire sales organization. You can look at it in kind of recruiting, then onboarding, then in the day-to-day life of the salesperson. John, what are the statistics you're hearing these days in terms of time available for selling?
Oh, I think the time available for selling has gone down significantly. Obviously, because there's so many other things that are getting in the way of sales. Administration, even finding your right prospects, all of that. There's so many things getting in the way, and because even lead generation and marketing has gotten so much more sophisticated.
Yeah, we've heard it dipping below 30% actually.
Yeah, so now you see that's the equivalent of my machine being down or my machine not being fully productive. Another organization we worked with a couple of years ago, we did kind of a time and motion survey. I mean, we have every day everybody fill out, how I spent my time. And we found that, again, a Fortune 500 organization, they were spending 17% on direct sales-related activities. That's being preparing for the call, conducting the call, doing the follow-up. And you said, 17%, what was the rest of that time being spent? It became simple. I said, I can double productivity for your organization, not by changing the way they sell, but by freeing up time for them to sell more.
Yeah, and this is a really interesting. You've raised two kind of powerful anecdotes from big companies, which, if we're thinking about talking to the small to medium-sized business out there, it may not be millions of dollars, right? But you're still talking about, heck, if it can happen in companies that large and that well managed, it can definitely happen in companies of a lot smaller size, but the impacts may be even greater.
Well, you've got to think that you're even having less time to sell in a small company because you're wearing even more hats, right?
Well, that's exactly it. The challenge in the small company is because it's small, say startups or even small, just established small companies, people wear multiple hats, and that's part of the business. But then you got to start saying, maybe I need to start splitting that up so I can really, again, I like looking at this from an investment management point of view and an asset management point of view of saying, am I deploying those as efficiently and as effectively as I can to get the results I need?
Well, and that's a perfect kind of segue into talking about, one of our favorite hobby horses to ride, which is training, right? So, again, if you take the mindset of, say, a small business owner or even a medium-sized business that's going to really stringently look at their cost line if they're buying software, if they're buying hardware, or if they're deploying, physical resources, they're going to scrub that 5 ways to Sunday. But yet, when it comes to training, and this is kind of our second question we know sales training is expensive, from a time and a resources and a sunk cost perspective, if you will. How does ongoing coaching play into that overall cost of selling?
Well, I mean, ongoing coaching is really the highest leverage of a sales manager's time. If I look at sales training is, John, I know from your background and from my own background, I know I can go in and at the end of a sales training session, they do the evaluation and everybody gets happy faces.
Yeah, smile sheets.
I can do that and I can max that out really well. But then on Monday they go back and do their jobs.
Exactly.
And the problem is too often we look at training as an event and not part of an integrated system. So, we have to have training and we have to then have ongoing coaching and reinforcement. We've gotten to the point that for what training we do, if we don't have a commitment from management for ongoing reinforcement and coaching, and we don't have a documented plan and commitment that we measure managers on to do that, we refuse to bid on it because we say, save your money, you're just wasting it. The other part is training has to be integrated into the fabric of the business. It has to reinforce and be reinforced by the strategy. It has to reinforce and be reinforced by the tools. So as you look at a CRM system or something like that, we've got to integrate the training into what the CRM system provides for us or what the sales tools provide for us. So the biggest mistake in training we make, and the billions of dollars literally that we lose, is by treating training as an event and everybody thinking, I've trained them, they'll go out and do the right thing. Well, and it's not bad intention on the salespeople's part, it's just the way the world works.
So why is it always such a struggle? Because I've always told people, and I think you'd agree with that if you took 100 CEOs and put them in a line and asked them how important is training, all of them would put their hand up and say, yes, it's very important. But then when you ask them, well, how much money are you going to spend on training this year? They'd be, oh, well, I don't know, maybe one or two would actually make a significant investment. So how do we overcome this issue and it seems to be even more acute for sales, where, as you say, they think, oh, well, give them a book or give them a course, a 2-week or a 3-day workshop, and they'll be fine.
Bring in a hot shot.
Bring in a hot shot. Why is it so acute when it comes to sales that they don't see that as a really important investment over the long term?
I've been trying to figure that out for if I did that, I'd write a book and, be spending my time on a beach down in Mexico or something. We do tend to talk out of both sides of our mouths, and I do think that I think the press of everyday business and at whatever level, the sheer momentum of getting involved in tasks, I don't think we take the time to step back and see how all these things are interrelated, and how how critical these investments are in producing results. I also think that by this bad habit of treating training as a result, as an event, we don't get results. So so when you go up the food chain and say, I want to spend $1 million on training, they said, well, what results did you get out of the last $1 million you spent? And they say none.
Right.
Well, who's going to approve that? So, I think what we have to do is again start saying, how do we make training impactful and effective, and how do we make it sustainable? And, frankly, I go at some of the training vendors and say, you own a responsibility in this. You can collect dollars for an event, but you're not having an impact on your customers. So you should know if they refuse to put in the sustaining practices of coaching and reinforcement, if they refuse to integrate it into the fabric of their business, then tell them they're wasting their money and don't accept their purchase order. I mean, you'll lose a few purchase orders, but over time you'll build a stronger customer base.
Yeah, that's undoubtedly true for sales consultants. But let's take this even a step deeper, right? Let's go into kind of the sales process itself, because what you're really talking about with training kind of bolstering is determining an effective use of a salesperson's time, right? Do this, don't do that, right? So how do you go about trapping ROI, the return on investment, Dave, that you suggested earlier in sales activities?
Well, I mean, first of all, you have to kind of start taking some metrics of it, and you have to start measuring the right points. And as I know both of you feel very strongly is we, I think, tend to measure the wrong point. We measure quota attainment, quota year-to-date, revenue, sales, and so on and so forth. Those are all trailing indicators. They're important indicators, but they don't tell. By the time we know we're off target, it's too late to fix anything. So we have to go up the food chain to see, are we doing the right things today that will produce the POs and the revenue 6 months, a year, or whatever from now. And so to go up that, to backtrack, to go from saying what generates a PO, what generates that, and to go back requires a lot of discipline and understanding. It requires understanding what that sales process is. It requires understanding those triggers. It requires to say that, I think I've shared with some audiences, I measure myself, the most important measurement in our organization is net new prospecting calls a week. My personal quota is I have to make 6 net new prospecting calls a week. That means I have to have a conversation with somebody like one of you.
Right.
And it has to be a new person. It's not, re-upping a client or something like that. If I don't have those 6 calls this week, I know in 15 months I won't make my numbers. Yeah. And so we don't have, and I measure each we have 15 guys, I measure each one of them on that. My guy in Grenoble has a quota of 8 a week. My guy in Atlanta has a quota of 12 a week. It varies because of our production, our win rates, our client bases, and so on. And so each person has the number, but that's the most critical thing, because I know if they get that number right, is our blended win rate in our company is 89%.
Wow.
So I know they can. I know they'll close roughly 9 out of 10 deals if they get the prospecting thing right and we get good qualified. So we have to understand the business of selling. We have to understand the business of getting a purchase order and move those things back so that we're measuring the right things. And then I have this kind of 4-quadrant thing. So we have the operational stuff. That might be metrics. How many calls do I make? How many prospecting calls? But then you go back and say, what are the skills and capabilities I need to do to make that prospecting call? do I have the right people to do that? Have I trained them the right way to make those 6 new prospecting calls a week? Am I providing them the information, the leads, and so on, so that they can make those 6 prospecting calls a week? For me to come up with my 6 prospecting calls 5 years ago took a lot of preparation and research and so on and so forth. Well, now through our marketing activities, social activities, and so on and so forth, we get leads coming in, so it takes much less time. But we have to understand that business and work backwards. And at the root of it, it's the right people, the right skills, the right training, the right tools, to enable them to do the right activities, to produce the right outcomes, and then to ripple down and eventually produce purchase orders.
Yeah, so what you've outlined brilliantly there is, as you say, is most people measure lagging indicators, quota performance, whatever you sold last month, all of that, which is great, but you can have no impact.
Everyone thinks that measuring by quotas is great until they miss one.
Yeah, but it's also, as David said, it's backward looking. You can't do anything about it. What you outlined was a bunch of leading indicators. If you're hitting your X amount of prospecting calls or whatever, that it will have impact down the road. So how much of this comes back to the fact that you understand how to do this, but a lot of sales managers don't understand how to do this, have never been trained in this, and all they understand is lagging indicators. So is that a huge gap, as you see, that the fact that we don't really train sales managers to understand what to look for?
Yeah, I think, the most difficult job in selling these days, I think, is the first-line sales manager.
Agreed.
Because the first-line sales manager is kind of like, say, the platoon sergeant or something. It's really where things get done. It's the intersection of what is top management wanting to do, what are the top priorities, and what are the strategies, and how do I translate that into on-the-ground execution. And, so the first line management, and actually, if you look at it, the investment that we make in training first line sales managers is just appalling. Yeah. It's terrible. We don't, one, it's a hiring issue too, is we don't put the right person in. We usually put our top performer in, and that doesn't mean they're a good sales manager, so we've got a double whammy. We've lost our top performer, and we've created a god-awful sales manager.
Or you're dividing their attention by keeping their quota or just reducing it, so they're acting as a player coach, right, which distracts them even further, right?
Well, the player coach is the most thankless first-line manager job in the world because, you do have – I have to go do my personal territory, but I have to coach these guys. So one is, are we selecting the right people who can be successful? And then are we equipping, just like our salespeople, are we equipping those guys with success? They look at do they know how to coach? Do they know why to coach? Do they know what a good coaching looks like? Do they have the data and information that allows them to be data-driven in their coaching, not just feel good in it? They do things, like most managers I talk to, they schedule coaching time. Well, coaching time doesn't work because it's the first thing to be sacrificed when you're under the gun. And until you integrate coaching into the fabric of what you do every day. So, as a sales manager, I sit down and I do deal reviews every day. I do pipeline reviews maybe weekly or bi-monthly or something like that. Well, why don't I, the business management part of a deal review, and why don't I do coaching at the same time? So I make sure that this deal is in control, but at the same time I coach the salesperson on how to get better. So now, what I've done is I've integrated all those things into the fabric of what I do every day, and I've made it, one, more immediate, two, more focused, and achievable. I can get it done.
Yeah, and why don't I ask you what you think you did well and what you think you could have done better, rather than me just telling you what you should do, right?
Well, that's it. I got off earlier this morning. I was on a call with a client in Europe, and we were going through. It's a massive turnaround that we're doing, and we were going through the EVP of EMEA is saying, well, I did the coaching reviews with my guys this afternoon, and I said, what did those look like? And he said, they were status reports. And I said, okay, what's wrong with that? You know, a status report isn't a deal review.
Yeah.
Isn't a proper deal review. You know, you just learn past history. Well, shoot, I could have, read Salesforce for that.
Right.
You know, why did I take anybody's time? Why didn't I take that review and start sitting down with the salesperson and say, what should we be doing? How can we compress the sales cycle? How can we increase our probability of winning? How can we increase our average transaction value in this deal? You know, and start challenging them with those questions and start collaborating with them about how we do that. That's the way a deal review has to work. That's the way people learn. That's the way that people develop, and that's the way you produce business.
Mm-hmm. And that's where you have an impact on your salespeople, and you reduce that cost of sales and that churn rate.
Exactly. And then you start looking at it, you run the math on it. So if I'm a sales manager, I think, how do I know that my team is in control? How do I know that my team is going to make the numbers? So, for instance, if I don't have a sales process, how do I know that each deal is in control? Well, the only way I do that is I have to inspect each deal. I have to review that. So let's say I'm a sales manager. I have a team of 10 people, and let's say each person only has 10 active deals. So that's 100 deals that they're working on. Let's say I spend 30 minutes per deal per week. So you do the math. 30 minutes times 100 turns out to be 3,000 minutes, and you do the calculation and say, oh my God, I don't have time to do that. So now you start saying, here's some other fundamentals that we don't spend some time about. Once I have a process in place, now rather than to know that I'm in control, is all I have to do is inspect the process. All I have to do is look at 1 or 2 deals, and if the person is executing the deal, leveraging the process very, very well, I can on those 2 deals, I can expect that they're doing the same thing in the other 8 deals. So now I have the time to do the quality of coaching and the quality of development, not only to improve their performance in those 2 deals, but have them take those lessons to the other 8 deals that they're working on and apply them themselves. So, you know, it's all kind of logic, common sense, but you have to learn how all these things hang together. Yeah. And I think we don't do that.
Well, and that's almost the statistic that should kind of scare sales managers the most, is when they start to add up their total amount of bandwidth and they realize that it's finite, how they manage their time. Speaking of which, we love to do this at Sales Chats here, where we kind of flip it on its head and we start to get personal. So, Dave, why don't you tell us your Sales Chats supercharged sales tip? What do you do to get to peak performance daily as an individual within your business?
Well, I mean, one is you know, we have routines. You know, we block times in certain ways, and we manage our time very well. So one is, I mentioned earlier that we know our numbers. We know the numbers that we have to hit. So my number is 6. That's my key number. If I do 6 a week, I know I'm in control. And if Todd in Atlanta does his 12 a week, if Mark in Grenoble does his 8 a week, I know we're in control. So doing that, so now that allows me to set my schedule. The luxury we have is we're a global business. So I realize that it's the business day somewhere in the world, right? All the time. So I literally, a venture capitalist is interviewing me on this and doing an article, is I start my day at 4 o'clock in the morning. And by 4:30, I'm making calls. Well, I'm catching people early mid-afternoon in Europe. Yeah. And I work the time zones. And what he thought was, the reason he wanted this article is, we were talking about 8 o'clock one morning, and I said, you're my 7th call already. Wow. You're my 3rd cup of coffee and my 7th call. And he says, you know, oh my God, you get more done in this period of time. So, you know, and what I do is mornings I'm working the time zones doing calls. During the business day, I'm in meetings, you know, either on phone calls doing something like this, or in meetings with clients. You know, midday I take some time out to do emails, to do some tweets, to do a couple of other calls, and then evening I do some other things. The other thing I do is I schedule everything. Everything goes into the calendar. So if I'm doing a prospecting call, that call's scheduled. I'm not, you know, it's maybe my first call, but I've gone through with the prospect, and I've said, here's the time we're calling. Here's the agenda of what I'd like to talk about in our call. What would you like to talk about? So the huge productivity tip there is that individual comes into the meeting prepared to talk about something. I come into the meeting prepared to talk about something. So we actually accomplish something rather than, you know, just picking up the phone and randomly dialing Eric and say, hey, how's it going? You want to go surfing or for a bike ride?
Yeah, well, you know? I'm not sure he wants to go surfing today, but those are great tips, and I think we should have you back for another session just to talk about planning and preparation. But this has been fantastic today. You know, we've learned about the fact that you really need to calculate the cost of a turnover in your sales force. You need to invest the money in recruiting and doing it properly, and be patient in finding the right people. You got to invest in your sales managers and make sure they understand leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators. And if you're going to invest in training, invest in ongoing training, not in event-based training.
Right.
Well, it's been great having you, Dave. We really appreciate it.
It's such a privilege and such a pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks a lot, Dave.
Bye, everybody.
Great. Have great weekends.